Yeah, so good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I'm going to become a rarity today because I'm not going to speak with slides. So you have to listen to me, or not, as the case may be. And I also think I'm a bit of a rarity, though I did hear we had Jeanette here from HPRA, but there's not very many regulators around the table. This is far more about you, research networks, patients, than regulation. But, you know, listening to the discussion on the registries earlier on and the administrative side and the need for simplification, these are all things that resonated with me as well. So we do listen. So why am I here? Well, first of all, I'm not a specialist in rare diseases I'm not a specialist in anything, maybe a little bit in regulation, but I'm not a specialist, I'm not an expert. But rare diseases are very, very close to my heart. And the reason for this was back in 1998, I went to work for the European Commission, and I was put on the file, get the Orphan Medicines Act through the Parliament. And I didn't even know what an orphan medicine was at the time, but it opened me up to the whole ecosystem of rare disease research, of patients, and how we could make a difference in this field. And that's something that stuck very close with me from those early days in 1998 now to where I'm in a very different role as Executive Director of the European Medicines Regulator. And then I found that actually my father and two of my two grandmothers suffered from rare diseases. And we didn't really know we just knew that it was a disease that people didn't know about. We didn't know there was something called rare diseases. And that also makes me think about, you know, the difference between how you make connections back then and how you can make connections now. So there's huge opportunities in terms of making connections and making connections between researchers, between patients, between developers. And I think that's what we need to build on now so that I can do my job, which is trying to get products, medicines that actually get to patients with rare diseases. And I want to tell you a little bit about how we do that, and I suppose some of the opportunities that you should be aware of. So when we drafted the Orphan Medicines Regulation back in the late 1990s, it was loosely based on the Orphan Act of the U.S. Orphan Drug Act, and that had been really successful in getting research into rare diseases that had never been done before. And I was I had a conversation last night about, you know, how some countries are more active, or were at the time more active in this space. And I have to say that France was one of the major drivers here. But for me, as a relatively young regulator in the European Commission, what I understood very quickly was this is an area where there are huge resource challenges, there's huge need. People work tirelessly to make a difference in this area. So, you know, one of the things that I wanted to do as my part in the orphan medicines was how can we help this? How can we help this happen? And I think the one thing that everybody had in common was the belief in science and the patient voice. And those are two things that the European Orphan Medicines Regulation is founded on. It was the first time in the history of Europe that we had patients as members in our scientific committees. And I can tell you the stories about how we got those patients, but it's a long story, so I'm not going to do that now. But that was a game changer. because even though since we're 30, the European Medicines Agency is 30 years old this year, and we have been working with patients since the very beginning, but this was the first time that patients had a formal role in our systems, and every new scientific committee since then has had patients in our committees. And again, that was a game changer. And I would say we go on from the recognizing the role of patients, the need for a patient voice in regulation, to really trying to make that, to seeing how it works within our community. So for us, when we're looking at trying to evaluate a medicine, in any field, but especially in the rare disease field, the experts are the patients, because they know much more about their disease than any individual regulator is going to know. So we really need to build on the information and the experience and what matters, because, you can't, I always say, you can have the best regulated medicine in the world, but it doesn't make any difference unless it reaches patients and is useful to them. So now we're in a situation where where patients have a real voice in our systems. They're active participants in the medicines regulation process. We involve them in our risk assessments, in our labeling evaluations, in all the safety parameters, so that we're in touch with what's happening, so we can give advice on how to use the product as it evolves and moves out into to treat more people. And we also collect patient experience data to help to improve outcomes. And this, again, it's at every stage of the regulatory process, from development, orphan drug designation, helping us with understanding the clinical trial design, the benefit risk assessment, and of course, reporting of adverse events. But of course, in the end, it's about the evidence. And one of our strategic priorities is really how to improve how clinical trials are conducted in Europe. And we have an initiative called Accelerating Clinical Trials in the EU, ACT-EU. And some of we're trying to bring in some innovative approaches, helping to improve patient participation in clinical trials. And of course, if the disease is rare, you're unlikely to find a clinical trial on your doorstep. So things like good guidance for decentralized clinical trials makes a big difference here. We have come out with guidance on decentralized clinical trials, which really tries to talk about digital tools, telemedicine, more mobile and local healthcare, helping us collect patient information, how you manage home health visits, remote monitoring, etc. So these are the sort of things that we hope will make a difference. And I have to say that the whole area of decentralized clinical trial and the promise of decentralized clinical trials really came into its own during COVID, where you really had challenges in getting to sites. And I think the experience there, and I just saw, we saw the drop-off in recruitments during COVID, but actually there's been some game changers that I think are really important here. Now, again, if you're looking at trying to get better data, and we're always trying to get better data, and better data from clinical trials is a big part of understanding whether the products work or not. And so our key challenge here is, how do you get enough patients when there are so few of them around? And of course, this is where the role of the European reference networks come in, because these networks can facilitate discussions, they can facilitate patient recruitment, and that all brings us to a much, much better situation as regards access for patients to clinical trials. The other thing I wanted just to mention here is that we also need to learn, particularly from clinical trials in rare diseases, because maybe the approaches that we use traditionally for bigger trials have to be adapted. But you'll only get that feedback experience if you get the developers, the patients, the researchers together and come back and say, well, this didn't work for us, so we have to think about how it could work different. So trying to get the trial sponsors, investigators and participants together to say what the learnings were and how we can use that to shape policy in the future. The other area I wanted to just briefly mention is the whole area of real-world evidence and how that contributes. And you had today's session about the registries, of course, is very, very important there. But we have set up a network of federated databases. It's called Darwin, Data Analytics and Real-World Interrogation Network, to try and bring together different databases across Europe to answer some of the questions. And again, here's an area where we can answer more questions on rare disease, epidemiology, treatment use, and so on, that we haven't been able to do before. And this is also, we're using it as a model for some of the initiatives that should become part of the European health data space. So we're trying to learn already and see if we can contribute to that. Now, I wanted to talk just a little bit about, what we can do at the European Medicines Agency to help. And I think one of the things is, first of all, please be aware that we're there. Let's start with that. And we have a number of different opportunities for people to come to talk to us with either ideas or clinical trials or future projects. We have what we call the Innovation Task Force, where you can come and just say, listen, I have a couple of questions I want to ask. Can you tell us what we need to do on the regulatory side? And we'll try and give you some advice. We have a small and medium-sized enterprise office where we provide information targeted to small and medium-sized enterprises. We have a small academic office, which will be increased now in the next couple of years, but we have a regulatory science platform where we're bringing academics and regulators together. So really, just to say that my final point really is about collaboration, because if we're this whole conference for me is about collaboration. I also do a lot of collaboration in the global space and in the rare disease space. That is absolutely that is so important. So it has to remain our default setting. We have to work very closely with partners and stakeholders at local, regional, and international level. And it's very important for me that everybody plays their part here. We have to make these connections. We're in a time when we can make connections so much better than when we were thinking about this Orphan Medicines Act back in 1998. So it's really a time of opportunity. It's a window to get better clinical evidence, to find and use data better, to enable real-time and real-world data based on patient experience. And conferences such as this, I think, give opportunities for us to make those connections. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you.